Picture a highway, not a dramatic mountain pass, not a river crossing guarded by ancient fortifications. Just a road, a flat, straight Ukrainian road cutting through industrial flatland, connecting cities that most people in the world could not find on a map without help. The H-20, a two-lane artery running north to south through the Donetsk region, linking four cities that together form something. Ukraine spent 11 years and an enormous amount of money building into what military planners call a fortress belt. Sloviansk in the north, Kramatorsk beside it, Druzhkivka in the middle, and at the southern end, the anchor point, the place where the whole chain is held to the ground, a city called Kostiantynivka. Right now, in the middle of June 2026, that anchor is being pulled loose. Russian forces are inside the city, not at the gates, not on the outskirts, inside, moving through buildings, occupying floors, pressing from the south and the east, while a second arm curves around from the northwest, and the gap between those two arms, the gap that, if it closes, would encircle Ukrainian troops in the southern part of the city, is approximately 2 kilometers wide. 2 kilometers in a city. That is not a comfortable distance. That is an afternoon of hard urban fighting. And the question that every serious analyst of this war is quietly asking right now, in language careful enough to hedge but honest enough to alarm, is this: is Kostiantynivka the new Bakhmut, and is Ukraine about to lose it this summer? Before I tell you what that means, let me tell you what it actually is. Because most coverage of this battle, when it appears at all, treats it as another city name in a list of city names, another front in a war that has numbed audiences with its relentlessness. That framing misses the architecture. The fortress belt is not a metaphor. It is a real defensive infrastructure. Bunkers, trenches, minefields, anti-tank obstacles, reinforced firing positions that Ukraine began constructing in 2014 after Russia annexed Crimea and launched its first intervention in Donbass. 11 years of construction. After Bakhmut fell in 2023 and exposed just how quickly a city can be consumed by this kind of grinding offensive, Ukraine poured additional resources into strengthening the belt. Former Defense Minister Andriy Zahorodnyuk described the investment as massive. The belt runs 50 kilometers from north to south. Before the current phase of the war began, it housed over 380,000 people. Kostiantynivka is the southern anchor of that system. It sits at the junction of the H-20 highway and a railway line. Those two details, road and rail, are not incidental. They are the reason the city matters militarily in a way that transcends its size. A fortress belt is only as strong as its most vulnerable point, and the southern anchor is the point where any attacker who breaks through gains access to the entire spine of the system. Lose the anchor and the cities to the north, Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, suddenly become a different kind of problem. Not an insurmountable problem, but a fundamentally different and more dangerous one. This is what the Battle of Kostiantynivka is actually about. Not a city, a chain. Today is June 14th, 2026, and in the last 72 hours, the tempo of this battle has tightened in ways that demand attention. On June 10th, the Institute for the Study of War, one of the more reliable open-source trackers of this conflict, reported that Russia's Bakhmut and Dzerzhynsk tactical groups had advanced south of Kostiantynivka and into the eastern part of the city. Ukrainian analyst Kostiantyn assessed a likely tactical breakthrough in the city's western central area, with the forward elements of those two Russian groups roughly 2 kilometers apart. On June 11th, Ukrainian forces of the 100th and 156th Mechanized Infantry Brigades reportedly withdrew from an area southwest of the city. On June 12th, ISW assessed that Russian forces had, and I'm going to paraphrase carefully here because the language matters, likely consolidated some tactical positions within the city beyond infiltration. That is not the same as control, but it is not nothing either. And on June 13th, yesterday, Brigadier General Oleksandr Bakulin, commander of Ukraine's 19th Army Corps, confirmed the situation is, in his words, difficult, while insisting there is no encirclement of Ukrainian troops in the Kostiantynivka area. He also confirmed that approximately 130 Russian servicemen are actively operating inside the city, and that more than 700 Russian soldiers have been eliminated there since February of this year alone. Read those numbers together. 700 Russian soldiers killed inside one medium-sized city in roughly 4 months. And Russia is still advancing. That tells you something important about what kind of war this has become and about the scale of resources Russia is prepared to burn. This is Prophet Zhang. If you want to understand the war, underneath the war, the economics, the logistics, the slow mathematics of attrition that the headline coverage almost never touches, this channel is where we do that work. Subscribe if that's the kind of analysis you're looking for. We'll be here. Now let's follow the money. Or more precisely, let's follow the manpower, because in this phase of the war, manpower and money have become nearly the same thing. Russia's spring and summer offensive of 2026 was not originally aimed at Kostiantynivka. That is the first thing to understand. The original plan, to the extent that Russian operational planning is ever fully legible from the outside, targeted Sloviansk, the northern anchor of the fortress belt, approached from the Lyman direction. That push stalled completely, made no significant gains. And the reason it stalled matters. The western grouping of Russian forces, the formation responsible for that axis, appears to lack the combat capacity to push on Sloviansk simultaneously, while also defending against Ukrainian counterattacks in the Kupiansk and Borova directions. Russia had to choose, and what Russia chose, by process of elimination more than strategic brilliance, was to pivot south to Kostiantynivka. The current assault is not a master plan being executed on schedule. It is a forced adaptation from a position of strategic frustration. That context shapes how you read the tactical situation. Two Russian groups are now converging on the city from different directions. The Bakhmut group, built around the 3rd Army Corps, is advancing from the northeast along the T-0504 road through Stupochki and Novodmitrivka. The Dzerzhynsk group, operating in the 8th Combined Arms Army Zone, is pressing from Ilinivka into the northwestern and southwestern districts. The pincer geometry is real. As of June 10th, those two arms were approximately 2 kilometers apart, with the Kramatorsk River, a small urban waterway, as what analysts are calling the last serious obstacle between them. Whether that river constitutes a meaningful defensive barrier is genuinely contested. It is not a major waterway. Its defensive value depends on the bank infrastructure and building coverage, and that information is not clearly available. I want to be honest about that uncertainty. What is clear is the pace of Russian losses to achieve this geometry. Ukrainian estimates, and these are Ukrainian estimates, so take them with appropriate skepticism, suggest that Russian forces lost approximately 316 killed and wounded per square kilometer of captured territory in 20 per square kilometer. In a year when drone warfare has made infantry movement across open ground extraordinarily costly, Russia is still feeding men into these advances at a rate that, by any conventional military logic, should be prohibitive. The question that no one can answer from the outside, and that may be the central question of this entire phase of the war, whether Russia can sustain that rate of loss faster than it can replace the men being lost. And here the numbers start to get interesting. According to ISW analysis citing Russian investigative outlet Vazhnie Istorii, approximately 71,200 people received one-time enlistment bonuses in Russia in the first quarter of 2026. That sounds large until you compare it to the previous year. It represents a 20% drop year over year. In 2025, 363,900 Russians signed military contracts, itself already 10% lower than the year before that. The trend line is not ambiguous. Russian recruitment is falling, not collapsing, falling. Meanwhile, Ukrainian estimates of total Russian personnel losses since February 2022 now exceed 1,380,000. Even accounting for the inevitable inflation in such figures from the Ukrainian side, the scale of attrition is staggering. And in early 2026, reports suggest Russia was recruiting around 800 new soldiers per day, while regional authorities were paying compensation for approximately 250 to 300 killed soldiers per day. The gap between those two numbers is narrower than it looks comfortable, and yet Russia is still inside Kostiantynivka, still advancing, still choosing to pay this price. Why? Because the battlefield mathematics only make sense when you understand the negotiating mathematics running parallel to them. Moscow is currently demanding the surrender of Ukraine's entire Donetsk fortress belt, Kostiantynivka, Druzhkivka, Sloviansk, and Kramatorsk, as a condition for any ceasefire. That demand, on its face, is maximalist and almost certainly not achievable on the battlefield in the near term. ENCIRCLEMENT has assessed explicitly that Russia is incapable of capturing Donetsk Oblast in 2026. But here's the mechanism that makes even partial urban gains strategically valuable in a way that purely military analysis misses. Every block of Kostiantynivka that Russian forces occupy before a ceasefire is frozen becomes a baseline, a fact on the ground, a starting position from which any future negotiation begins. Russia does not need to capture the entire fortress belt to use Kostiantynivka as leverage. It needs to be inside the city in a way that is visible, documented, and irreversible enough to shape what a realistic settlement looks like to outside mediators. This is the war beneath the war. The battle for Kostiantynivka is simultaneously a military operation and a real estate negotiation being conducted in rubble and blood. Every building Russia consolidates is a talking point in a future diplomatic room. And the urgency of that calculus is one reason Russia missed its own deadline. Russia's command reportedly targeted seizure of the city by May 2026, yet continues to press the assault despite the cost. Missing the deadline did not reduce the strategic need. It simply increased the pressure to make progress before any diplomatic window closes. Russia's federal budget deficit reached 5.9 trillion rubles in just the first 4 months of 2020. That figure, approximately 2.5% of GDP, represents the fiscal signature of a war economy running at maximum sustainable pressure. Russia can sustain this for a while. The question that economists tracking this conflict are asking is not whether Russia's war economy will collapse, but when the cumulative cost of sustaining these loss rates begins to constrain what Russia can do on the battlefield rather than just what it can afford on a spreadsheet. Those are different timelines and they don't necessarily align. I want to be honest about what I don't know. Because anyone selling you certainty about Kostiantynivka right now is lying, and this channel does not do that. There is a significant and as yet unresolved discrepancy in how much of the city Russia actually controls. A pro-Russian Telegram mapping account claimed approximately 55% of the city was under Russian control as of around June 12th. ISW's most recent credible assessment from June 10th put the area entered by Russian forces at roughly 12.7% of the city's area. Both of those numbers are real numbers that have appeared in coverage of this battle. They cannot both be right. The truth is likely somewhere between them, shaped by the difference between entered and consolidated and controlled, terms that mean meaningfully different things in urban warfare and that different analysts use in different ways. I am not going to tell you which number is correct. I don't know, and neither does anyone reporting from outside the city. Similarly, Brigadier General Bakhmut confirmed approximately 130 Russian servicemen inside the city. Ukrainian officers on the ground have cited figures closer to 250. Those numbers likely refer to different things, confirmed identified positions versus estimated total presence, but the discrepancy is real and unresolved. The Ukrainian withdrawal from the area southwest of the city on June 11th, attributed to the 100th and 156th Brigades, originated from Russian-side sources and OSINT accounts reposting Russian material. Neither Ukraine's general staff nor Ukrinform independently confirmed that withdrawal at the level of specificity that some coverage suggested. I am telling you this not to dismiss the reporting, but because the sourcing matters when you are trying to understand what is actually happening versus what one side wants you to believe is happening. And the anonymous Ukrainian brigade commander who told EU Observer on June 11th that, and I am paraphrasing his words carefully, it is quite possible that Ukrainian forces will lose Kostiantynivka by the end of summer. That is an honest frontline assessment from someone with direct exposure to the situation. It is not a military forecast. It is not an ISW assessment. ISW specifically declined to give a timeline for the city's potential fall. The end of summer framing is one analyst's honest read, not a verified projection. Both of those things can be true, the concern can be legitimate, and the certainty can be absent, and understanding that distinction is the difference between informed analysis and panic. There is one more layer to this that I think gets underweighted in most coverage, and it connects directly to why the battle looks the way it does at the tactical level. Russia has adapted its infantry tactics specifically to defeat Ukraine's drone advantage. The infiltration approach being used in Kostiantynivka, small groups of soldiers entering buildings, occupying floors, creating covered positions that cannot easily be targeted from above, is the same approach Russia used in Bakhmut, which fell to Russian forces at the start of 2026. It is being called by some analysts the Bakhmut playbook. Urban terrain is the one environment where drone effectiveness decreases sharply. An FPV drone following a small group of soldiers into a multi-story building faces corners, floors, stairwells, and structural obstructions that the open battlefield does not provide. The month of May 2026 saw an estimated 10,000 FPV drone strikes recorded along the Kramatorsk Sloviansk front alone, a number that illustrates both the density of drone warfare and the logic of why Russian forces are deliberately choosing to fight in the one environment where that density hurts them less. Military observer Denis Popovich framed this precisely in a Radio NV interview on June 10th. Those infiltration groups are being destroyed, he said, but the question is whether Ukraine has enough resources to destroy every group. If one of them holds, settles in, and goes undetected long enough, that path gets trampled wider by the forces following behind. That is the mechanism of infiltration warfare. Not a single breach, but 1,000 small probes, most of which fail, and the ones that survive become corridors. Against this, Ukraine retains real counterattack capability. Ukrainian forces have recently advanced in the Kostiantynivka Druzhkivka tactical area and cleared Russian infiltrators from at least one area southwest of the city. The front is not uniformly moving in one direction. Local Ukrainian counterstrokes continue. The 24th, 28th, and 93rd Mechanized Brigades defending the city are experienced formations, but the 156th and 100th Brigades, newer units, have had their commanders replaced due to personnel conflicts with higher command. That is a signal worth noting. Command turbulence in the middle of an active urban engagement is not a sign of institutional health. Now, why should this matter to you sitting somewhere far from eastern Ukraine, watching a war that has been running for more than 4 years and has arguably become background noise in the global news environment? Because the fortress belt is not just Ukraine's problem. The H-20 highway runs through cities that before this war housed nearly 400,000 people. If that defensive architecture collapses, not necessarily this summer, not necessarily all at once, but progressively, the pressure on European security architecture accelerates in ways that have real economic signatures. Defense spending across NATO Europe has been rising for 2 years. That spending is measured in budget deficits, in reallocated capital, in infrastructure investment redirected toward military readiness. Those are not abstract numbers. They flow through bond markets, through energy prices, through the cost of maintaining supply chains that depend on stability in a region that is visibly unstable. The war's economic footprint does not stop at Ukraine's borders. It never has. You feel it in ways you may not connect to a city on the H-20. And Russia is feeling it too, a 5.9 trillion ruble deficit in 4 months, a recruitment rate falling 20% year over year, a cost per square kilometer of captured territory that has more than doubled in a single year. These are not the numbers of a country executing a sustainable strategy. They are the numbers of a country that has decided the political cost of stopping is higher than the economic cost of continuing, and that is a different and more dangerous kind of decision-making than conventional strategic calculation. So where does that leave us? Let me tell you what the evidence actually shows and what it does not. The evidence shows that Russian forces are inside Kostiantynivka, that they are pressing from multiple directions, that the geometry of their approach creates a genuine encirclement risk for Ukrainian forces in the southern part of the city, and that the pace of the battle has accelerated in the last 2 weeks. It shows that Russia's spring offensive failed on its primary axis towards Sloviansk and pivoted to this secondary effort by necessity. It shows that Russia is paying an extraordinarily high cost in personnel to make relatively slow progress, and that its recruitment pipeline is under genuine pressure. It shows that Ukraine retains local counterattack capability, and that ISW does not expect a rapid operational breakthrough this summer. What the evidence does not show is the precise percentage of the city under Russian control. It does not show a verified timeline for the city's potential fall. It does not show whether the Kryvyi River constitutes a meaningful defensive barrier. It does not show whether Ukraine's command instability in some of its newer brigades will be resolved in time to matter. And it does not show what a ceasefire negotiation, if one comes, will do with whatever facts exist on the ground at that moment. Russia missed its deadline to capture Kostiantynivka by May. Russia will likely miss whatever its next internal deadline is. But missing a deadline in a grinding urban battle does not mean the battle is being won by the defender. Bakhmut's defenders held on for 11 months before the city fell. The holding was real. The fall was also real. Both can be true. Here's the question I keep returning to, and I want to leave it with you rather than pretend I have answered it. At what point does the cost of holding a position exceed the strategic value of the position itself, and who gets to make that calculation when the position is not just a city, but 11 years of construction, a diplomatic baseline, and the southern anchor of a chain that, if it breaks, changes the geometry of everything north of it? That question is being answered right now, in real time, by people under fire in a city most of the world has already stopped watching. The answer they give will shape negotiations, security architecture, and the economic calculations of governments for years. The rubble of Kostiantynivka is not a footnote. It is where the next chapter of this war is being written. This is Prophet Jang. I'll see you in the next one.